everyone that has tuned in local Fire network channels, that is Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Today is, of course, a Tuesday. Today is 16th of April, and in Uganda, things have been good today. Yes, it rained at night, but uh, things have been moving on well. We had sunshine during the day, and things have been moving on very well. Um, for those that are watching us from different countries, it might be night, it might be morning, but in Uganda it is evening, and it is actually it's going to night. We had some small issues that made us come late. We would have come here earlier, but we are late because of some issues, but they are settled now. No issues. All lights have been off um, since noon and even up to now. Or since noon up to the evening time when they came back. But hope things are moving on well. Um, First of all, I will thank uh, Twitter people for support. They always show us some support. Twitter people that watch us from Twitter. I'm always grateful for your support. Thank you so much. Like I said, today is a Tuesday, and of course, our topic today is going to rotate around the biggest issues affecting Africa today. Today, we are going to look at every we are looking at every issue that is affecting Africa. Let it be politics, the political, social, and economic issues. We are going to break them down and talk about them today. So, a lot is affecting Africa. We have neocolonialism. We have issues of uh, uh, mineral, of course, exploitators, the Chinese, the stuff. But today we want to focus on, of course, issues that are eating up Africa, issues that are becoming so common in Africa, things that are eating up Africa as a country. So, um, like one of the biggest issues are actually these are some of the issues, the biggest issues. We have political instabilities. We know that Africa has witnessed multiple coups leading political instabilities and of course various regions. So these abrupt changes in government disrupt governance, of course exacerbate conflicts and hinder development. We have, of course, conflict of insecurity, armed conflicts, of course, persist uh, in several African countries, with affecting civilians' safety and, of course, well-being. We have terrorism, ethnic tensions, and violence continue to pose, of course, serious threats in Africa. Corruption is also another biggest problem Africa is going through. Rampant corruption remains a major concern across the continent. So, corrupt practices undermine economic growth, erode public trust, and of course, hinder effective governance. We have, of course, education and literacy. Many African children of school going age are out of school, leading to high illiteracy rates in Africa. We have, of course, addressing, of course, education gaps is crucial and sustainable development. We have infrastructure and investment. So increased influence from countries like China and Russia has led to investment in African infrastructure. So balancing foreign investment while ensuring long-term benefits for African nations is essential. We have health challenges. Recently, Africa has been going through the COVID-19 pandemic and of course continues to impact Africa's healthcare system and economy. So access to healthcare, vaccination distribution and managing health crisis remains critical. Um, and I think we are going to base now on this crucial thing here, the climatic changes in Africa. We see that Africa faces environmental changes due to climatic change affecting agriculture, water resources, and the ecosystem. So, adaptation strategies and sustainable practices are vital for resilience. Today, we are seeing a lot of floods, and we are going to talk about floods in different countries of Africa today. How floods, of course, have affected Africa because we see a lot of floods. We see floods in Kenya, we see floods in Uganda. So uh, we have also economic disparities, economic inequality, of course, persists with the disparities between urban and rural areas. So effort to promote inclusive growth and reduce poverty are essential. We have migration and refugee crisis in Africa. So forced displacement due to conflict, environmental factors, and economic hardships leads to migration. So managing the refugee population and of course addressing root causes are pressing issues. We have gender equality and women's empowerment. So advancing gender equality remains crucial for Africa's progress. So empowering women economically, socially, and politically might be essential to those that, of course, want to implement, but not to me. So we see that these challenges require, of course, concerted efforts efforts from governments, international organizations, and civil society to create positive change to build a brighter future. So, before I go any further, um, we are going to talk. We are basically going to talk about floods, of course, in Africa. We are going to talk about floods. Uh, of course, we are going to look at what's causing floods in, of course, very many African countries because we see a lot of floods. Like very many countries, they are going through floods in Africa. So we are going to talk about floods. Sorry, sorry, something is going on here. Something not right is going on. Something not right is going on. So, um, I don't know why this thing is doing this. I don't know whether it's intentional, but this thing is corrupting me here. This thing is corrupting me here. I don't know why it is like this. So floods, like I said, floods are some of course, the biggest issues Africa is facing today. We see we see a lot of African countries going through floods, and most of these countries they are East African countries. So, of course, in the Western Central Africa, we see that 3.4 billion people are grappling with devastating impact of destructive floods. So the crisis has been, of course, triggered by worst floods in a decade, which have swept across several countries, including Nigeria, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Cameroon. So the situation is there, and of course, communities are facing immense challenges in these countries. Um, the situation we see that Nigeria, hundreds uh, of people lost their lives due to flood waters in the northwest. So these floods have affected sites for internally displaced people and host communities of Bano, Adamawa, and of course Yobe states. So, like floods come along with a lot of things like sweeping people's food away, displacing people because whenever floods come in, people's property get destroyed. And actually, most people in Africa um, build permanent, of course, permanent residences. So this has affected a lot of people in Nigeria, like I said. We see that displacement of over 1.3 people uh, have been displaced in Nigeria, and approximately 2.8 million have been, of course, impacted by flooding, with, of course, farmlands and roads submerged. That is Nigeria. We see that Central Sahel countries in Niger, Mali, and of course Burkina Faso, above average rains and flooding have resulted in loss of life, displacement of thousands, and the destruction of over 1 million hectares of cropland. So, anytime we hope to see famine in these countries, because if at all floods can kill, if at all floods can sweep away people's crops, people's food, what do we expect uh, uh, afterwards? And that is famine that we expect. So we see that say, climate crisis, of course, is exacerbating these challenges. Temperatures in Sahel are rising over 1.5 times faster than the global average, leading to livelihood disruptions, food insecurity, resource conflicts, and increased displacement. So, urgent support and financing are needed to build defenses, adapt, and mitigate the harmful consequences of extreme weather events in these vulnerable regions. So, we see that UNHCR humanitarian operation in West and Central Africa are dangerously and chronically underfunded. So donors are urged to provide immediate assistance to those on the front lines of this crisis. For instance, in Chad, only 43% of the required funds of the 2022 have been received, while Burkina Faso's operation are funded at just 42%. Nigeria and Niger also face significant funding gaps. Beyond the Sahel, Africa is witnessing the worst drought in 40 years. So the threat of famine in the whole of Africa, devastating, of course, cyclones in Mozambique and historic floods in southern Sudan and, of course, Kenya for 4 consecutive years, the urgency of climatic action cannot be overstated. So, and concerted efforts are needed to address the immediate needs of affecting communities and build resilience against future disasters before things become worse in these countries. I was watching news and I see I saw a bus in Kenya that was swept away by floods the other week. So these are things, of course, that have come from destruction of nature, tampering with nature. The more people tamper with nature, we see a lot of people, of course, even investors, the so-called investors in Africa, settling in swamps. And what has this brought? Whenever water is also water is something which is very sensitive and funny. Water creates its own way. uh, Water creates its own way whenever it finds like where it must be, the area it must occupy has been occupied. It finds its way. That's why we see a lot of floods now coming out. We saw a lot of floods in Africa, of course, in African countries and of course East Africa. The case in Kenya, the Kenya incident has been so much in newspapers and news across Africa and the world. So all we need is, of course, to find solutions on how to deal with such issues that are affecting, of course, Africa as a continent. Um, there are there are even more countries that, of course, that have been affected by floods. Not only Kenya and Nigeria, Burkina Faso, like I said, we see that a lot of cities, even in Kampala here, whenever it rains, Kampala becomes actually a lake. Water go into people's houses. So understanding what to be done about flooding involves, of course, how everyday urban activities of course exacerbate risks and how to reduce the inevitable exposure of floods risks at all scales, from individual household uh, to national governments and of course international river basin management. Those who change, of course, the landscape in ways that make flooding worse are not usually those who suffer the consequences of such changes. So understanding the interrelations between both geophysical processes and human drivers and human victims at multiple scales is required. So telecommunications mean that the rural, and the urban all affect one another across Africa. As in other continents, flooding may arise locally within built-up areas from debris blocking streams and from overflowing, of course, sewers. Nevertheless, many cities are flooded by major rivers that carry extreme flows of water from surrounding regions and even distant mountains. The cause and the impacts of flooding, human vulnerability, possibilities of risk reduction, and political uh, um, and of course management responsibility vary from household and community levels up to the subcontinental, of course, hydrologic system and global climatic system. So, coordinated action must take account of the differing scales of floods problems, ranging from those arising from highly localized thunderstorms to the huge flood flows on the major rivers produced by tropical cyclones. So, urban flood management needs local, regional, and national action at appropriate scales, with communities dealing with problems entirely with their areas, local governments acting as issues that are totally within their boundaries, and national governments or international river basins. So organizations dealing with problems across many administrations. So flooding may occur many times a month in parts of many African cities, usually through rainfall that overflows from channels or even, of course, does not reach defined channels. So heavy rains may also cause groundwater levels to raise to the surface, thus releasing subsurface water that begins to flood normally dry valley floors. Settlement on seas and lake shores are sometimes flooded by extremely high tides, storms, surges into, of course, tsunamis. So several different types of flooding can affect African, of course, cities. We have previous flooding from, of course, terrestrial rain that reaches the ground more quickly than it can, of course, infiltrate flow away downslope. So groundwater flooding, where the normally subsurface water table rises the ground surface and water emerges into basements and ground level rooms in buildings. So flooding from overflowing drains and channels that have insufficient capacity to, of course, evacuate all the water which flows into them. Flooding from major rivers that have brought huge volumes of water from areas maybe many tens, uh, or even hundreds of kilometers upstream. So shoreline, in addition, from large lakes and or seas during unusual storm surges or seismic wave events. We see that although the water is, of course, immediate cause of inundation, the water flows are produced by geophysical events, usually rain or shoreline waves. However, the actual height and extent of any given flood is determined by the nature of the ground surface. So the dimensions of the channel or coast along which flood flows develop, and by local obstruction to water movement. Such ground conditions are the products of many different human actions that change the land cover, alter the ability of water to infiltrate and impede the flow of water along channels, which is collectively such actions can be termed as human dimensions of flooding. So in Africa, most rural settlements in riverine or coastal wetlands are at risk of flooding. In built-up urban areas, inadequate drainage puts thousands at risk of flooding from frequent short duration but high-intensity thunderstorm rains for those whose homes are affected every time it rains. Such flash floods are an intolerable risk that reinforces impoverishment, insecurity, and ill health. We see that the vulnerability in the face of these flood risks is closely related to the ability to cope. Poor people are usually far more valuable to floods and their impact. So those than those who have, of course, more financial resources. The impacts of flooding on urban people stem from both the local damage to property, housing, transport, urban service access, and urban agriculture, and the direct effects of flooding in rural areas through disruption of food supplies and movement of raw materials and goods. So events at one scale have impact at other scales. These complex impacts stem from multiple causes, operate or of course operating at varying scales in different locations. We see that most urban social and environmental issues, including flooding and interconnected. are interconnected. So their drivers and effects across many times space scales. Such independent connections are now frequently termed as telecommunications. So we see that the well-established post-climatic telecommunication are paralleled by telecommunication associated with land use and land cover changes, including driven by mining, forestry, agriculture, and urbanization. So such changes, perhaps hundreds of miles away from the particular city, can have many impacts on urban households, enterprises, infrastructure, and public facilities. We see that urban telecommunications can help to establish the effect of land use and land cover, changes in one part of the river basin, and on water availability for irrigation or urban use. So people now, we see that um, African face major challenges associated with globalization, socio-economic and political change, and environmental risks may lower income urban people in Africa, and of course exposed to health risks resulting from poor housing, water, and of course sanitation, livelihood risks from insecure employment, and workplace hazards. So the impact of natural disasters that of course disproportionately affect informal settlements, and lack of government attention to their insecurity and illegal treatment. So understanding what is causing of course floods in tropical African cities. So we see that flooding involves how everyday urban activities exacerbate flood risks, and how to reduce the inevitable exposure of flood risks at all scales, from individual households to national governments and international river basin managements. So, um, floods have a lot of risks. We have seen, like I said, people, the bus swept out people last time in Kenya due to floods. It swept away people. The flood swept away the bus with people in Kenya. They're like, they're like, uh, they're like now 2.5 weeks now after the incident happened. It swept away people. So this is what is happening, of course, in Africa and in East African countries. At the beginning of this week, flood swept away a woman in Uganda in one of the trenches. She was trying to cross, and of course, she was swept by floods. This week, at the beginning of this week in Uganda. So, So, however much Africa is focusing on issues of political stability, issues, uh, issues, however much Africa is, of course, focusing on issues of its political instability, uh, uh, issues of economy, but people are dying of these common uh, things now, the big issues. So we see that heavy rains and flooding continue to ravage parts of central uh, of central, coastal, southern east, northern western, and of course northeastern Kenya, resulting in the deaths of at least 174 people since October, according to authorities. So, as of 18 December last year, authorities reported that more than half a million people have been displaced in Kenya due to flooding and heavy rains, while the UNHCR reported that over 300 refugees have also been affected. Uh, Approximately 90% of those impacted by the flooding reside in, of course, Mandela, Garissa, Tana River, and of course, Wangi and Mary on Meru County. Sorry. So many of those affected have temporarily relocated to displacement sites after the Tana River and other sensational rivers overflowed uh, temporarily and relocated to the sites of the Tana River and of course seasonal rivers. Overflow continues to evolve. We see that there are at least 180 makeshift displacement camps according to the Kenya Red Cross Society, with 61 in Tana River County alone, while some people in, of course, Garissa, Mandela, and Wanji counties have started to return to their homes as water levels have receded. There have been reports of waterborne diseases such as cholera, diarrhea in flooded affected areas, with the new cases of cholera reported in Tana River County in December, while needs to remain, of course, 463,000 people have been reached, with some from humanitarian crisis. So, heavy rains since December last year have been in Kenya, and of course they have caused a lot uh, uh, have caused a lot of problems in Kenya. We see that the recent downpour underscored the region's, of course, vulnerability to the climate change, which is leading to more extreme weather. So, flooding throughout East Africa has killed dozens of people and displaced tens of thousands, underscoring intensifying climate risks in the drought-stricken region, as aid, of course, agencies report. We see that flooding in Kenya over the weekend uprooted scores of homes, decimated hundreds of acres of farmland, and killed at least 15 people in the country, according to the Kenya Red Cross. So torrential rain swept the usually dry country, sending waters tearing through entire villages and washing through the streets. The disaster forced over 4,000 families to, of course, evacuate from their homes. So the Kenya Red Cross Society, which provides humanitarian relief in the country, also noted that 1,000 livestock animals were killed and at least 97 hectares of agricultural farmland were destroyed by the downpour. So flooding has continued to attract neighboring East African states as well, with dozens dying in Ethiopia and Somalia. So, according to Ethiopia's regional government, more than 20 people have died and over 12,000 others have been forced out of their homes in Somali region due to flash flooding this rainy season. So in Somalia, heavy flooding during the rainy season, which runs from October to December, displaced more than 113,000 people and temporarily affected hundreds. The southwest and, of course, Jubaland states are the worst hit, with, of course, a total about 536,000 people affected. We see that earlier this year, floods forced over 250,000 people out of their homes after the Shabelle River in central Somalia broke its banks and, of course, submerged the town of Beledweyne. We see that the Illinois is a weather pattern associated with increased heat worldwide, as well as drought in some parts of the world and heavy rains elsewhere. When we look at North Africa, it's one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, with extreme weather events growing increasingly common and intense. So since late 2020, Somalia as well as parts of Ethiopia and Kenya have been suffering the region's worst drought in 40 years. At least at the end of 2019, um, 265 people died and 10,000 were displaced during the 2 months of rainless rainfall in several countries of East Africa. So the extreme weather affected rose to 2 million people and washed away tens of thousands of livestock animals in Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Southern Sudan, Tanzania, and here in Uganda. So climatic change is making floods more frequent uh, and severe. The Kenya Red Cross Society said after the latest flash flooding, there is an urgent need to invest in climate adaptation measures to protect communities from devastating impacts of floods and other adverse weather conditions. So, uh, those are floods that, of course, occurred across Africa between December last year and today. And we see that since the onset of flood, of course, effects have been felt in 38 countries across the country, resulting to loss of lives in Kenya, injuries, displacement, and destruction of key infrastructure. Increase in, of course, contaminated water has also led to more secondary effects, which include disease outbreak, vector and waterborne diseases, hence increased the need to provide clean and safe water to the risk communities in Kenya. So, a population of around 757,000 people, of course, 138 households have been affected to date since the onset of the short rains of these. We see that 64,000 people households have been displaced in Mandela, Wiki, Garissa, Mombasa, Tenerife, of course, Masabiti, Meru, among others. So, additionally, we see that the destruction of over uh, 25,000 acres of land and of course 1,000 businesses and 17,000 livestock deaths have been reported in Kenya. So there are 231 reported cases of cholera across the country, with 213 in Lamu, 18 cases in Tana River. So there are, of course, fertilities with the case of fertility rate of 1.2 in, of course, Ramu, Tana River County has reported one fertility. And of course, we see that floods are exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in the region just as it emerges from the worst drought in 4 decades, which has left millions of people in hunger. So some of the hardest hit areas have been the semi-arid lands, where pastoralism in the economic driver for livelihoods. There are areas that are still recovering from the worst drought uh, in 40 years. This has led to high rates of malnutrition. The drought coupled with El-Nino rains and of course extreme temperatures underscores the climatic change challenges that Kenya and other countries in the Horn of African region are grappling with. Moreover, the situation is worsening as the rains continue, with the country's Kenya Meteorological Department predicting continued heavy rains until April of this year. So we see that forecast of rains within continued impact above average rainfall was experienced in most parts of the country, with most effects being felt in eastern coast, upper eastern and western Kenya. Parts during October and November last year showed rainfall is expected to continue, like I said, since April this year, and of course Kenya is experiencing rains uh, now. That's why actually even people were swept away by the heavy rains. Ila kuna mvua.
Um, there are very many issues that are really affecting Africa, and yes, drought is one of the issues. Like my colleague is, of course, explaining. Good evening for those who are watching us from wherever you are, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Thank you so much for loving and supporting Fire Network. I'll let Innocent to explain about the floods. I'll get on another big issue that is affecting Africa today. But before I will I'll supplement a little bit on our situations of floods in Africa. Um, Africa is not the worst continent that experiences floods. Yeah, we know that. We have got a lot of countries out there that experience floods at a very, very extremely large, you know, uh, scale. We have also, these floods at times they are actually caused by a huge hailstorm or heavy rainfalls that fall on Africa's land. But again, those who have been following the truth behind the climatical changes, actually, most of these changes are not man-made. Sorry, they're not natural. Most of these changes are actually man-made. It is very important for Africa's weather um, to actually have these kind of rainfalls to those who are targeting Africa's population as per the World Order Plan. I'm gonna hit a little bit on what Innocent said, like when it's flooding, there are a lot of diseases that are recorded within that duration of heavy rainfalls in Africa. Remember, when you're Africa is one of the continents that has a characteristic of rainfall and sunshine throughout the year. That means you cannot experience rainfall for the entire, no, not even for the entire 2 days without having a sun come out. All right, and the rainfall in Africa usually comes in intervals. It is either going to rain throughout the night, and during daytime you're going to have your sun shining. But the weather has changed a little. That if when it is raining, if at all it is raining, at times it rains crazy, cats and dogs, heavily, and then it causes a lot uh, of problems, drought, displacement of people, loss of property, lives, and of course, it still affects the economy. Um, when it usually rains, sorry, for those who do science, so for those who do bio science, whatever, and at least if you have an idea about diseases, viruses, germs, and how these things are, you realize that they're so very favorable in cold temperatures, right? Most of these things do not prefer hot temperatures. There's a certain degree that germs prefer, there's a certain degrees viruses prefer, there's a certain degree of temperature all the things prefer. Yeah, and we know most of the diseases that are actually affecting Africa are actually laboratory made. It is very important for us to have that kind of temperature that is going to allow whatever virus that is being sent to Africa to incubate and multiply. Because if at all the climate is not tempered with, it is very, there is a huge or high chance that whatever virus they are manufacturing may not be able to actually um, multiply in Africa. All right. So, secondly, we have a lot of these so-called investors. I keep on questioning myself, why is it that we have a lot of investors in Africa who prefer settling in swampy areas, who prefer settling in wetlands? Africans try as much as possible to make sure that they preserve the wetlands, part the law of Africa, and of course most of the African countries. The environmental law, preserving the wetlands and not settling in there. But we see a lot of investors, more especially the Chinese now, that decide that it is so extremely good for them to be settling in that kind of places, and the government allows them to do that. So I, at times we overlook a lot of things, but whenever people come into Africa, they have a lot of agendas, and I can tell you this is very visible. All right, so as we look at the situations of floods, like Innocent is explaining, um, there is a lot of causes of this kind of this kind of climatic core change that Africa is actually experiencing. All right, so Africa is also having a lot of other big issues that are affecting it. And among these issues, you know, among these issues, because there are very many issues really. Let me look at Lando. Lando says, Innocent and Maria, greetings, family. How are you doing, Lando? We are doing great, and thank you, of course, for coming through. It has been long. It has been long since I saw Lando. But yeah, we are doing fine. Thank you. We hope you're doing good too. Yeah. So Africa has been experiencing huge challenges, and so just talking about the floods, we also have economical issues, we have the political issues, we have the civil, we have the insecurities, we have political, wars. Africa is experiencing huge and a lot of challenges, but this time round, like I said, I'm going to discuss about um, the wars or the instabilities that are actually taking place in Africa. When you look at, if at all anyone has never been to Africa, and you open probably any page that you open anything that or any page on Google or whatever website, when you want to know about Africa, a lot of things will come at the front page, and among the things, they will never skip showing you an image of a young boy holding a gun, right, in a military uniform, and which is questionable, really, more especially to someone who's never been here. You're looking at, and the first thing is like, what is this place, and why do we have young people having these guns? Yes, they will show you the vegetation. You will see the falls. You will see the vegetation. You will see, because of course the vegetation, I guess, represents Africa because everybody thinks we live in forests, more especially those who have never been here before. So that vegetation is not to be forgotten. But deep inside the vegetation, of course, comes these little children with guns on their backs and on their chests and their arms and on their shoulders, whatever. But what does this actually define? Instability in Africa. Let me first read Lando's comment. Says, I'm lucky to be well and alive. I had some deadly occurrence, yeah, but that's the nature of busy. Oh, sorry, you had a deadly occurrence. Sorry about that, Lando. I'm glad you're good. Yeah, always like asking, well, but I always see you sometimes in a group, and I thought, yeah, you're fine, right? Once in a while, I'll see you drop something, and when I see that, I know you're good. I'm sorry to learn about that, but I hope you're doing good now. Yeah, but it has been long since you were on our live. But yeah. Mm. So, guys, like I was explaining to you, we see that most of the countries in Africa, that are experiencing these insecurities. Actually, mineral countries that have natural resources, and some of these insecurity, most of them actually, yeah, some of these insecurities are actually caused by those who have interest in illegal mining of these minerals in Africa. Like I said, most of the situations in Africa are not usually natural. Most of the things that are affecting Africa are man-made things. And I can tell you this is part of the plan of exploiting Africa, depopulating Africa, turning Africa to what they want it to, because Africa is an interest of apparently a lot of people. All right, it's only Africans who don't see Africa as a place to stay, but a lot of people have huge interest in Africa. And that's why it's very important that they depopulate Africa. It is very important that they make Africa so insecure as they keep on illegally mining the Africa's minerals. And also, of course, turning Africa into a dumping site, turning Africa into, let me call it a testing school, like where they have to do all their tests, So that is it. Now, in Africa, as we have these wars that have claimed a million billion of lives of both young and old, unborn children, and also, prominent people. When it comes to these kind of wars, these wars do not have sides. All right, whether you are prominent, whether you're what, it takes everybody, both sides. And that the funniest thing of this all, the people who engineer these conflicts never lose. It is the same Africans that are losing. We are losing twice. We are losing big time. We are losing with the rebels who are being backed up by those who have interest in Africa's minerals. Of course, despite being rebellious and also having these guns in the bush, it does not take away the fact that they are Africans. So we are losing those young people, most of them who are even kidnapped at a very young age, and of course taken into, hijacked to, of course, become whatever, to become rebels. They are, at times, also die. All right, and then Africa is losing both sides. As we struggle for that peace, we are losing the minerals, we are losing the young children who are hijacked. But those people who are behind this conflict, or the people who engineer the conflicts, are usually not losing nothing. They are not losing anything. Sorry. So we have had very huge and big problems all over Africa, and it is so unfortunate that most of us in Africa don't really care what is going on with other people. We know that we have seen a lot of, we have experienced a lot of conflicts in Africa, worsening political instability in the parts of the continent, exemplified by the nine military coups and lack of domestic stability in most of the countries, conflict within Ethiopia, Nigeria, Sudan, Congo, of course, in other countries that has claimed a lot of lives. Lando says that the continent is destabilized in order to disrupt change and balance. The planet is chaotic because we are African or out of the order and balanced by others doing to us as global people. I guess we are destabilized by what others are doing to us as global people. I guess it's what Lando meant to say. But yes, yes, and then we know that Africa comes second in the number of armed conflicts per region, with more than 35 non-international armed conflicts taking place in Burkina Faso, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, Senegal, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. Now, several armed groups fighting against government forces and against each other are involved in this conflict. Now, in other Western powers, uh, and neighboring countries are intervening, and they take place in Burkina Faso, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, and Somalia. But usually when we have these are things that are actually staged. For example, the situation in Congo. I love to use this because the situation in Congo is so visible. We usually have a situation in Congo where we have armed conflict, but usually we see the United Nations coming in to intervene. And it's not because I know United Nations has all the tools that can suppress the situation in Congo, but it is very important for United Nations as well that Congo still remains in this kind of situation, because as as Congo is fighting, the United Nations is busy taking what minerals, because this has been clearly seen in some videos where we've seen United Nations trucks or United Nations vehicles fall during a flood, and then bags of gold fall off the vehicles, all right, which means or which shows that these people are smuggling minerals, all right, from, of course, Congo. So it is important because I know United Nations has all the tools, because the United Nations is not a one man's army. All right, we see a lot of different forces working under United Nations. And if United Nations wanted this situation in Congo to end, it would have ended long time ago. But it is so important, and that's why they're sending their people there. And whoever signs agreements and deals with this organizations usually at an advantage of also exploiting those very places. We have had complaints of the people of Congo complaining about Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda. Most of those who go as they are going in the name of United Nations, ending up looting the minerals, of course, of Congo. You understand? So these are most of the countries that are, most of these countries and their leaders really know what is going on. Well, um, also that Cameroon is one of the top of the list with the several, you know, Cameroon is one of the top of the list with several international armed conflicts um, involving multiple armed groups The government is involved in national, international armed um, conflicts against a wide array of rebel groups, including the Ant Balaka and the ex Seleka. There are also parallel non-international armed conflicts due to the infighting between various armed groups and, of course, different rebellious groups in Cameroon. I know most of you guys have heard about the Ambazonia. Cameroon has been the Ambazonia uh, war. Where Cameroon has been having war conflicts between the French-speaking people in Cameroon and the English-speaking people, and those others want to break away, and those others say you cannot break away because you have apparently all the resources of Cameroon are found in your particular region, and we have invested in a lot and all that. So there is still a lot of struggle in Cameroon until now. So we know that as Africa as a continent, we have suffered a lot when it comes to um, these kind of conflicts. We remember back in time we had the Somalia Civil War that ran around 1990. It started in 1991. It was a typical civil war where a lot of Africans lost their lives. Let's not forget the Nigerian Civil War, which was around 1967, where we had, of course, the Igbo people, Biafra, and all that. The Rwanda genocide of 1994, the Rhodes Resistance Army insurgent of 1987, Eritrea Ethiopia War of 1998. Africa has experienced a series of course, conflicts until this century. And most of these conflicts are either caused by tribal wars, um, because tribal wars, ethnic war, internal conflicts, and all that. Now, the Somalia Civil War of 1991, where armed conflicts in Africa during the 20th century caused an anonymous loss of human life, collapse of socio-economic system, and the degradation of health and education services across the continent, from the Nigeria Civil War to the Somalia Civil War. Now, these 20th century conflicts submitted civilians to intense physical and psychological trauma and negatively impacted development throughout many African nations. Now, to understand the magnitude and the scope of inflicted trauma, and in order to prevent it, of course, its recurrence, military historian and students should consider a lot of significance. We know that I always say there is something that we always see these new conflicts until now. They are so very much connecting to the conflicts that actually happen. But usually people don't look at this. We don't put this into consideration. We have the conflicts that are in Congo. Actually, remember there is a time where Congolese came up and said Kagame is exploiting Congo. Kagame has rebels in Congo, and Kagame said he's just following those people who, of course, ran during the genocide. Those who want to kill people, Rwandese and stuff like that. So you can see that the situation in Congo right now has a link to the genocide of 1994 in Congo. Most of these conflicts have a link. All right. Some people are always bitter about what happened. Some people are traumatized. They feel like they have to fight back. And this is why we are seeing most of these people turning into sellers. Despite of us seeing the Rwandese rebellion groups in Congo, we forget the fact that we have these rebellion groups in Congo because um, it was easy for them to be, of course, It was easy for them to be convinced to join this kind of rebellion because for them they felt like they have a reason to fight. They had a reason to cause instabilities. All right. Most of these, even if we say that we have people who are engineering these wars, they just don't wake up from the blue and they decide, Maria, come over, probably you come over. We want you to have a rebellion group or stuff like that. There is always an attachment. There's always a psychological trauma that is always affecting these people, and whoever uses these people knows. There's always a root that causes that evil mind. All right. So most of these, we had most of the civil wars that took place. We still have Somalia. We still have conflicts in Somalia. If you all remember the civil war of 1991 that took place in Somalia, all right, and now we still have issues in Somalia. All the things are linked to those kind of civil wars. It is very easy for someone to convince someone who has been psychologically affected by different things. There are people who are ready to fight back, and unfortunately, these are the people probably the governments have neglected a lot because we feel like, all right, the war ended, now we are good. You are forgetting there are people who are left total orphans. They have no relatives. All their parents were killed. All their family was killed. It is one person remaining. Such kind of people are people who are willing to do anything. All right. These are people who are willing to do anything. And that's why I say most of these conflicts that we are seeing, despite of the fact that they are being engineered by those who have a big interest on Africa's minerals, these people just don't come out from the blue and agree, all right, to commit these kind of crimes on the land. But these are people who are traumatized. These are people who have psychological issues, all right? They experienced loss. And after all this came to seize, the government and the nation and the continent forgot about them because they felt they have temper or they have maybe touched this and it is actually done. So it should be remembered that it is important, okay, for these people to be remembered. Probably, maybe we shall see a lot of security. You don't come around. People don't just come around and have peace in their heart after such kind of dark moments in their lives. All right. So I guess, yeah. Now we know that like in around 1991, a coup ousted dictator Muhammad Ziyad Barrel, the president of the Somali Democratic Republic, um, shifted in the balance of power, of course, sparkling a 20 plus year old war that killed as many as 1 million Somalis via violence, famine, or diseases following, of course, Barrel's removal from power. Now, the Somali Democratic Republic divided into two opposition parties: the Somali National Movement in the northern and of course the United Somali Congress of the south. Now, this separation made it difficult to achieve control of the conflicting functions because no one ruling entity was recognized by all Somalis. Now, those living in the north would not recognize authority um, the southern faction, and those in the southern opposed leadership from the Somalis in the north. The lack of course, central government forced the US to close its embassy that same year. The United Nations and the United States became heavily involved in the conflict from 1992 to 1995, sending military forces and humanitarian aid to the country. Now, the United States officially ended its involvement in Somalia in 1994 due to the lack of um, foreseeable resolution and financial cost in excess of like 1.7 billion US dollars. Now, the Somali civil war's large death toll and protracted conflict could possibly have been avoided with earlier humanitarian action, according to a 1999 report. Like I said, we needed that humanitarian action. This still clinges back to what I was trying to explain. Before even we decide to question the situation of this conflict, we should realize there are some people who are very bitter. Like I said, nobody wakes up one time and agrees to do such kind of things. It's not easy for whoever it is who wants to control or generate these wars to come and start convincing people from the blue. There are always those small groups that are joined to have a payback. There are those small groups that are willing to fight back, right? So this is how we see these kind of conflicts coming into place. We tend to forget the people who have experienced dark moments. Kagame usually says he comes to Congo to fight the opponents or a tribe that is up against his tribe. The biggest question still lies: do those people still benefit when it comes to Rwanda's government? And if at all they are in Congo, why is he fighting them? Because we've never had these people coming to Rwanda and causing insurgency, or these people coming to Rwanda and causing conflicts. These are people who refused to join Kagame's government. They say if it is Kagame coming into Rwanda's power, we are not going to stay in Rwanda, despite that we are people of Rwanda. So they moved to Congo. All right. And then if you decide to say that you're going to pick that group of people because they're up against you, instead of humanitarianly handling these people, welcoming them back home, creating that huge friendship, allowing them to live peacefully, and then you're trying to fight yet. And then when do you expect those kind of conflicts to end? And this is why it is important and it's so easy for these people to use our own. I'll let Innocent to say something. I'll come back and continue with the conflicts.
Um, First and foremost, I will thank those that are still watching us even up to now. People from Twitter, thank you for watching, and of course, don't forget to follow up this page. Uh, let's grow this page, this Twitter page, Black, of course, Fire Network page on Twitter. Let's keep following as you watch, you follow, you of course you refer people, you share our lives to other people that of course that are interested in African issues, African related issues. Um, Another problem that of course that is uh, that is of course affecting Africa besides uh, besides the conflicts, we have a lot of illiteracy levels in Africa. A lot of illiteracy levels. When we look at education and illiteracy in Africa remains a significant challenge, impacting the lives of millions of people in Africa. So, the exclusion rate, we see that the sub-Saharan Africa faces the highest rate of education exclusion globally. Shockingly, nearly 60% of the youth aged 17 or mean 15 to 17 are not enrolled in sport. And of course, over one fifth of African children between ages of 6 and 11 do not attend school. And the situation worsens as they reach adolescence. So girls are, of course, disappropriately affected, and 9 million girls between ages of 6 and 11 will never attend school, compared to 6 million boys. So obstacles of learning, there are very many in Africa. uh, we have infrastructure challenges. Some schools lack proper structures with inadequate outpost facilities like toilets, desks, chairs. For instance, the woman Harissa, a primary school student in Nigeria, highlighted the absence of basic amenities, of course, in his school. So, however much small schools exist, however much few schools exist in Africa, they don't have those amenities. They don't have they don't have structures that support students, of course, to learn. You find schools, the other time I was watching news, there is a school in northern Uganda where kids were studying from the church. All, all actually, all the classes from kindergarten to post primary seven, all the primary section was in the, of course, in a church. So how will these kids, of course, be able to learn and understand everything that is taught? It is impossible. So this becomes a challenge, infrastructure challenges. However much a lot of money is, of course, put in budgets yearly from African governments, that of course that is put to education sector, but we don't see this money working. We never see this money, of course, being put in these schools for kids and students to study. Even when you look at the teachers, you may find out like one teacher is teaching over four subjects because of the lack of teachers. No one can, of course, be employed in such schools that, of course, can support themselves, in terms of amenities that are required at school. Uh, in terms of food, like kids don't eat food at school. Yet, by the way, most of these schools, these are government schools. When you look at these schools that are not having, of course, enough. They're not having enough staff. These are government schools. So we see that attitude towards education. So skepticism about Western style learning and gender biasness contribute to the problem. So girls face 36% of the exclusion rate by adolescents compared to the 32 percent from boys. So we see that the high drop rates in, of course, African countries is high. In South Africa, 40% of the students drop out before completing grade 12, which girls being the majority that drop out. So this perpetuates cycles of unemployment and poverty. So 10,000, like the Akona Wanda, and of course the Akona Wanda expressing regret about not continuing um, to their studies, emphasizing the importance of education for future. So we see that reading crisis, Africa has been grappling with the reading crisis for over decades. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the situation with over half of the world is 10-year-old potentially unable to read by the end of 2021. So you can see how um, Africa is being affected in terms of education. So when we look at the youth literacy rate, despite of the improvements, uh, the youth literacy rate in, of course, sub-Saharan Africa remains the lowest globally at 72% compared to the 90% in the Middle East and North Africa and 97% in the Latin America and Caribbean. So that is Africa. So access to literacy. So Literacy skills are essential for accessing other tools. So fundamental rights and better future addressing literacy challenge in Africa is crucial for overcoming poverty, health crisis, and of course conflict. So that is how, of course, uh, 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 like education has challenged Africa. How low, of course, education level has challenged very many African societies because uh, when you look at the education sector in African countries, like they don't employ someone who is not educated alongside having skills what that they will require papers. They want you to present papers down for, of course, to employ you somewhere, let it be a government job or anything. You have to be at least educated somehow. You must be having papers. You must be, of course, be having a certain skill backed by papers. Because very many institutions actually they are giving out jobs, but you find out like you don't have enough papers to of course to make it on that job. You'll end up unemployed. The other thing is like a lot of illiteracy levels they have created ignorance among Africans, and of course this ignorance has resulted into very many problems. The ignorance. Very many African people are ignorant about the diseases we face in daily life. Ignorance and illiteracy has made Africans not to know our own history, not to know our identity. That's why they're embracing, of course, the Bazungu things in Africa because we don't know our identity. We don't know what happens. Ofori, thank you for that. Like, thank you. You had got lost. I hope you're doing good. You're one of our greatest viewers on Facebook, and I appreciate your time putting to watch our shows. Ofori Menso, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Ofori. So, like I said, low levels of education um, have caused a lot of problems in Africa and African societies. A lot of people have been, their land has been taken by intruders just because of ignorance, just because they don't know where to go, just because of illiteracy. Like people don't people don't understand like how things run, how issues of land like how issues of land are settled and of course done. I see a lot of Ugandans, their land is being taken at the expense of the rich people. Someone comes into your land, claims the land, goes even to court, when in reality this guy knows that it isn't his land. Just because of ignorance that of course rotates around African people. And besides anything, and like people, even if like illiteracy doesn't mean that even people have gone to school and of course it remain illiterate. People have gone to school and remain illiterate just because the education system that of course we follow today looks upon and of course embraces colonial education system, the colonizers education system, which of course doesn't give those fundamental basics for one to learn about Africa, about the society that we live in. Because All we need is to learn about the society. We need to learn about the society and the relevance to our society. Teaching me about history of France when I'm in Africa, how am I going to apply history of France to Africa? So this is how people have, of course, remained illiterate. Along, besides someone being educated, even goes to a university, graduates, gets back, but someone remains ignorant about certain things because of the low, of course, the poor education system that Africa holds, and this becomes a challenge. Uh, some people claim that sometime back, girls were not given chance in African societies to go to school, which wasn't, of course, right, because when you look at what, of course, what is termed as the informal education. This is the education system that, of course, that taught that wasn't discriminative to everyone. It is this education system that we see people that are discriminated, but for a more informal education system, it wasn't discriminative. It was relevant. Like the teachings they brought to people were relevant. But just because people have mixed, of course, minds about everything, um, they undermine informal education. They go in for formal education, which of course doesn't give those basics for one to learn and, of course, to apply in real society. A lot of people graduate after school, and you find them on streets. They can't do anything apart from speaking English, French, Chinese language, and other languages, other foreign languages. They can't do anything. They don't have that critical thinking, that critical analyzing and examining the situation to solve problems outside the world of education. Yet, when someone during in the informal education, like they say, this is the education that, of course, provided someone with the knowledge to apply to whatever that goes around in the society. It was relevant. They taught someone at each stage of growth. Each stage of growth was, of course, important for someone to understand certain issues compared to what we learn now. That's why actually even the kids now they are becoming so immoral just because of the things they are taught when they have not reached that age, just because the things they learn in, of course, wrong ages. So this has created immorality. Education system has created immorality, has, of course, eroded African cultures, has eroded African languages. I see a lot of people playing around with native languages. They like someone can't express him or herself in a native language, which, of course, becomes a challenging factor. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the I'm gonna oh the situation in Africa really I would say that the entire system in Africa is still a system of the colonizers, and at times most of the Africans I just have no any other choice than to embrace what it is that they embrace. Um, you know, all right, guys. Oh, I'm having a little, but I guess I'm fine. There are situations that really happen in Africa, like I've told you guys the previous topic of insecurity, that are actually situations that have been caused by ignorance, not the education part of ignorance, but the fact that we tend not to understand the people around us. We are not so human or very human. We don't have that humanity when it comes to people. Everyone in Africa, more especially the leaders, only focus on whatever they want to achieve as leaders in Africa and usually forget a lot of people who have lost a lot during the process of struggle to maybe independence, struggle to a new government, struggle to change and all that. Um, this is why we have this kind of conflicts coming up. Um, Africa is also experiencing a difficulty or an issue of economy. And when you look at Africa's economy, really, there are usually at times when I only have to listen when people are talking, more especially when it comes to those others who will be blaming the situations anyhow. There is a video I was watching today on YouTube. Um, there's a certain tribe, I think in Benin, they were exhibiting their cultural, beauty, and someone recorded the video. And it had a caption that was like, Africa is rich and beautiful. I guess it was trying to promote the culture. And most of the comments actually were coming from the fellow Africans on that channel were so very appalling. So some of them were like, first of all, culture is evil. I think they were the culture had to do with that huge snake. Yeah, that was awesome. I hear it, right? So most of them were like, first of all, this is so evil. Jesus is the way. All right. And then someone was like, if our culture does not help us, we need to I guess they were trying to say we need to have yeah, technology. This culture is bullshit. Why don't you make phones? These are grown ass because I was going through each comment and I was forced to check through their profiles. And these were grown ass men. Actually, most of them were men. And I realized that we have a big problem. We have a big problem, and if we do not really identify the reasons why we're experiencing what we're experiencing now, there is no way we can find solution. Everyone has a right to judge African in whichever way you find fit. As someone will say, there are a lot of countries that gained independence. Why is that you guys are still poor? Someone will start to compare other places that are, of course, were also colonized, but apparently they are, maybe they feel like they are richer. Um, but then I look at these people and then I don't really understand because let me tell you something. Most of these people were people who are privileged. All right. Even during the colonization era, these people were still privileged because they played a very big role in hindering Africa. They played a very big role in fighting against the rebellions in Africa. At that time, we did not have only the Bazungus or the British people who were fighting against Africa. We had different machineries. Like right now, we have the Wagner group or the Wagner group from Russia. That time, we had the British had their machineries from different colonial states that were outside Africa that were fighting really Africans. We also had even some others that were in Africa and were brought to fight Africans. There is a time when we had even people coming from Sudan and they were fighting in East Africa. They are fighting on the behalf of the British. So we even see some other black people were used to fight against other territories. So I think sometimes before even you skip to start comparing why those others are the way they are, you should go through proper history. All right? You should go through the proper history of this whole thing rather than thinking that you know things that you really do not know. All right, so Africa as okay, wait, so so we know that most of the minerals that are used to manufacture phones actually goes from Africa, all right? And why doesn't Africa manufacture their own phone? That would be the biggest question. Okay, now before we address this, um, there are always reasons why at times we experience what we experience. And now the reason why we don't manufacture phones, it is not that Africa doesn't manufacture phones really. Uganda also manufactures phones. Uganda has some phones. Uganda is manufacturing some phones. The phones are big and good. They look good. They're smartphones. They're so beautiful if you look at them. Yeah, and they are competing with other good phones. But these phones are not known outside Uganda. Maybe some other few countries may know about the phones. We have got a lot of African countries that are actually producing things. But why is it that the world doesn't know these things? Uganda recently was manufacturing cars, buses, whatever. They're beautiful cars. If you look at them, they're looking good. And they're really good cars. Okay? And they have gone through their tests. All right? But why don't we see these cars? Why don't we see these products that Africa is manufacturing? Because there has been a sanction that has been put on Africa's production. All right. There has been a sanction. When you look at our countries like China, Russia, and the US, and all these, in Germany no, it's not for strong cars, and in other countries that manufacture things, I think most of these companies have they have that image like they belong to a particular person, and but usually there is always some hidden powers behind these faces. And for them, I don't believe they go through all that Africa is supposed to go through. First of all, the world out there does not trust anything that is produced by Africans. Because I guess they have the mentality that we are not strong enough mentally, or we are not smart enough to produce things that are at their caliber or at their level. First of all, even the commodities or the products they send for our consumption is usually the residue part of the product. So if I don't think the world out there is ready to receive Africa's products. Because when you start jumping, you start concluding Africa, you're not producing shit. Africa, you're stupid. Sorry. I usually see that what is. I usually see such kind of dumb ass people. Really, Before even you judge that Africa is not producing, all right, I know we have a lot of shit that is going around. We know it is trying. There are sanctions that are put on the products that Africa produces. There is no way you're going to keep producing all the time without having a consumer. There is no way you're going to produce stuff all the time and again, without having a consumer. What is the purpose of you producing without a consumer? And those sanctions not only before those others outside Africa, but also the laws also enter in our bedrooms as Africans. So you decide, if you're deciding to put this kind of cars on the roads of Uganda, you're going to be condemned. Then you're going to be arrested, because these cars have to go through tests. They have to be agreed. The people are supposed to sign agreements. These cars are supposed to, the willingness of this car is supposed to be checked. And who is checking this car? It is someone who's up against Africa's production. So before I guess you even start jumping into the conclusion that Africa does not produce, or Africa doesn't have the potential of producing things, then maybe you should check a little bit and understand why. Because I believe in Africans more than any other. We are smart people. We have the potential. And this is why we have all these blocks that are preventing us from this. If all Africa decides to manufacture and produce, then who is going to be the consumer of those other commodities outside the world? I would say, all right, if Uganda decides to produce phones, then let us unite as Africans and choose to use only phones that are manufactured from Uganda, right? Probably that is what is running in your mind. I said the sanctions run even in Africa's bedrooms. You have got no choice than to agree, because our leaders signed memorandums with these different people. The memorandums that we signed engulf us in a certain bow, that we are not left with any choice rather than to agree, because these are signs, these are contracts, these are things that we signed that even are still going to continue going on for a long time. So how can you continue producing when you're not sure of the consumption? Even if you want, recently you guys of course had, I remember the days of COVID-19, where was our president, where, which Madagascar? Madagascar.
Yes. About the way you are,
Madagascar other, that they made COVID-19, medicines that they believed would heal. And a lot of people were still questioning this. Sanctions were even put on these medicines, all right? And why? This is a typical example. Okay, and Africans are so very scared of taking a big step, because even if you try, the government and these other people know you may have produced a better thing, but they always find a way of sabotaging whatever it is that you're producing, and the next time you'll see them produce the same thing. But after sabotaging yours, why? Because we are the consumers. And economically, it is stated that in the coming 15 years, even 15 years is far. In the coming 5 years, Africa is going to be one of the toppest consumers, because remember, we have the number of young people in Africa is increasing every day. Is at a high and rapid increase. That means these people who are increasing at the certain time, they are going to be youths. And youth are people who are at a huge percentage of consumption. They've got time apparently for everything. They are still vibrant. Okay, so if at all this, before I guess we even judge the situation in Africa, we should understand that these things are real. That's it, yeah. That's it. So no, yeah, let me
so Uh, Going back to, of course, I'm sorry, Maria was discussing different things. I'm also, I'm also, I'm also going to go through different things. Like today, we of course we decided to go through the problems Africa is, of course, affecting. There are big problems Africa is facing rather than any other problem that we see in Africa today. Before I go any further, I'll first of all thank the people that have tuned in, the people that, of course, that are watching me from different social media platforms. That is YouTube, Twitter being the biggest fan and the biggest best Twitter, and of course Facebook. Ofori. Thank you for that. And thank you for watching. I'm calling you upon all, wherever you're watching from. Let it be Twitter, like and follow. For those that are watching from YouTube, subscribe and like and share our videos. And of course, YouTube, Facebook, like and follow the page. It is in Uganda. It is, of course, it is 8. Uganda. It is 8. It is 8:25 in Uganda, East Africa. East um um So, going back to, of course, education issues, there is something small I did not share, but the sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of education exclusion globally, according to of course, the statistics. You see that education is considered a universal human right, as well as an issue of public good and responsibility. However, there are still, many, of course, particularly children in developing African countries who do not enjoy this right. As the world marks the fourth International Day of Education under the theme of Change Force Transforming Education, we see that in many African nations, those who can afford education send their children to private schools in the city. We see that according to the United Nations Education, Scientific and Culture Organizations, over the fifth of the African children between the ages of 6 to 11 are not in school. While nearly 60% of the youth between ages of 15 to 17 are not enrolled. So the education of girls is particularly concerned. Over 9 million girls on the continent between the ages of 6 and 11 will never attend school, compared to the 6 million boys. By the time they reach adolescent, girls have 36% exclusion rate compared to the 32% of the boys. So, looking at the obstacles of learning, uh, it is still common in many areas to find children on farms and playing on streets instead of attending school. So, some countries lack proper education structures, and many are, of course, dilapidated. So there is no toilets, desks, or even chairs in many schools. So we see that differing attitudes towards the value of formal education is another problem. So skepticism of Western style learning and the belief that girls not need education concorded with, of course, regional instability have created challenging environment for learning to thrive. So when we look at Congo, you look at that, you find children fighting, you find children, of course, engaging in wars. You find children engaging in mining in Congo. When you go to Congo, you find children in these mining sites. When you go to Uganda, there are even some there are mines where they mine rocks. You find children there eating rocks, and that is Africa. This has of course resulted in uh, reduction of course, education to people. So tackling worrying dropout rates, we see that in South Africa, at least 40% of all students drop out of school before completing grade 12, like I said. Girls make up the majority of this group. So the consequences of youth prematurely dropping out of school are severe as long lasting, with many, of course, trapped in of course, vicious cycle of unemployment and poverty of their parents. So I should have continued with, of course, a lot of students say that they would have continued with their studies, but falling pregnant, of course, becoming teen mothers in South Africa and, of course, other countries in Africa make them stay uh, at home. So we see that in North Nigeria, we see that local authorities are also encouraging children to stay in the classrooms. So we see that, which of course, the only education which brings, of course, very many people uh, together. We see that the co-founder of Give North Education Campaign, which advocates basic education for all, not just a privileged few, has dedicated his life to helping, of course, rural kids. And I think we should get even other people across Africa to, of course, create campaigns that, of course, can help African people attain education. I don't see activists for education. However much we see feminist activists, we see environmental activists, but we never see activists for education that is, of course, related to kids and children. We see a lot of people going through a lot of activation, a lot of projects, but we don't see people coming out in Africa to fight for how people should be educated and how people should be informed about certain things and how things should be done in Africa. We would have not been actually too ignorant, to the extent that uh, a lot of ignorance is killing uh, is killing Africans more than HIV. So um, another problem that is, of course, affecting Africa, which I can't miss talking about today, is another big issue is about the corruption. We see that there is rampant corruption in both African governments and African communities today. So uh, a lot of governments have failed just because of corruption. A lot of infrastructure has failed, of course, of course, to be developed just because of corruption that we see in Africa that is growing like wildfire. So when we talk about South Africa, corruption in South Africa, of course, South Africa, I'm going to talk about South African corruption. Corruption in South Africa includes improper use of public resources for private ends, including bribery, improper favoritism, nepotism, uh, embezzlement, extortion. So corruption was at the highest during the period of state capture under the presidency of Jacob Zuma, and has remained widespread, negatively affecting criminal justice, service provision, economic, of course, opportunity, social cohesion, and, of course, political integrity in South Africa. So South Africa has a robust anti-corruption framework, but laws are inadequately enforced, and accountability in public sectors, such as the healthcare, remain below par. So, in addition, internal sanctions have been employed to discourage whistleblowers from reporting corrupt activities in both the public and private sectors. We see that over 76 percent of the South Africans believe that ordinary people risk retaliation and other negative consequences if they report instances of corruption. So, a scandal involving, of course, the Gupta family and the former South African President Jacob Zuma pushed Zuma out of the office as long as the list of corruption complaints against the president, of course, resurfaced. Complaints against Zuma range from the former leader's lavish spending of the state funds to delegating contracts based on nepotism and business with familiar connections of close ties benefiting through their association with him. So the Zondo Commission was later created to investigate Zuma and his associates for corruption on November 11th, 2020. And it was revealed that historic anti-corruption bill is resulted in uh, we see that it was revealed that the historical anti-corruption duties resulted in arrest of more than 100 South African political, education, health, police, and business officials on corruption charges. So, corruption has also, of course, negatively impacted South Africa's ability, the country's long-running energy crisis. We see that uh, in 2013, Afrobarometer found a substantial increase in the public perception of corruption since 2018. 66% of the South Africans uh, believed that the government would be doing more to curb corruption compared to 56% elsewhere on the continent. So South Africans' experience of the first-hand corruption ranks among the least on the first-hand basis in Africa. At one stage, only 15% of the South Africans admit to having paid a bribe. The average percentage of Africans having paid a bribe to the government officials was around 30%. So between 2011 and 15, former President Jacob Zuma's uh, public approval, of course, rating almost half uh, 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 half from 64% to 36%, possibly due to corruption scandals over that period. The majority of South Africans believed that various branches of the government should oversee other branches of government's work. So around the quarter of South Africans free uh, they should be allowed to be responsible for holding elected representatives and leaders. So, Transparency International 2013 Corruption Perception Index, of course, scored South Africa at 41 on the scale from zero, highly corrupt, to 100% very clean. When ranked by the score, South Africa ranked 83 among the 180 countries in the index. So, where the country ranked the first is perceived to have most honest public sector. Since the Transparency International began using the current scoring system in 2012, South Africa's score has been varied between high and 45 in 2016, and the lowest score in 41 in 2023 recently. So for the comparison with the world review scores, the best score in 2030 and 23 was 90, ranked number one. So the average score was 43. The worst score was 11, ranked in 180 countries. So for comparison with the regional scores, the average score among the sub-Saharan countries, we see that was 33. The highest score in the of course in the sub-Saharan Africa was 71, and the lowest score 11. So in 2021, we see that 9% of the South Africans believed that corruption was most important problem facing the country, meaning that corruption ranked second only to employment in the priorities of those surveyed 60%. believed that the government was doing very badly at fighting corruption, and other 15% believed that it was doing fairly badly. So, apartheid system and discrimination and segregation on racial grounds dominated the ideology of political system in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. So, this system, which intentionally excluded non-Afrikaners from civil service jobs, government positions, and politics, entirely came to an end in 1994 when the African National Congress, headed by Nelson Mandela, conducted negotiations with the South African government at the time. So, before the abolition of course, apartheid, the civil service was a passive medium for rent seeking and the preferential treatment of Afrikaners. So policies favoring Afrikaners culture and education system, the awarding of government contracts to Afrikaner business, and the funding of pastoral Afrikaner organizations was a common phenomenon during the era of apartheid. So the building of the rural homeland states in the 1980s created ideal projects for rent seeking, with many homelands leaders, of course, presiding over massive networks of patronage. So, notable corruption scandal during apartheid was, of course, the Maulgate notable corruption scandal during the apartheid. So the scandal that involved the improper use of public funds to conduct the pro-apartheid propaganda campaign. The scandal brought down the government of Prime Minister John Foster. So during the anti-apartheid struggle, the African National Congress (ANC) was receiving funds from the foreign donors in order to build up strong opposition parties to protest against South Africa's national party and apartheid. So these leaders were given large sums of money without formal bookkeeping. There is, of course, however, no reports of evidence of corruption. The ANC tradition of loyalty to the organization was shaped in apartheid era with clear implication in modern day ANC politics. So in the middle of years of Jacob Zuma's presidency, corruption became rampant in the most government departments, intelligence agents, and police and military. So there is much ongoing debate regarding the origins of corruption and the definition of corruption in, of course, South Africa today. But the inherited bureaucracy and the political culture, which of course originated in apartheid era, of course, era, has rendered corruption issues hard to trace and tackle. So the presidency of Jacob Zuma following 2009 created an environment, of course, where corruption has flourished under new leadership. Both new and, of course, politicians, all that created their own types of corruption, benefiting those in their inner cycles. Although forms of course, endemic corruption were, of course, passed on the new order since 1994, new forms of corruption have emerged, adding new layers of theft through state pursuit. So we see that in terms of corruption in South Africa, there is, although South Africa is subject to various types of corruption, three notable forms of wasteful expenditure, state capture, and corruption related to or using of black economic empowerment legislation. So recent state capture scandals involving South African politicians and, of course, Gupta family have brought these types of corruption into public spotlight. So preach corruption is another relevant issue affecting public service and day-to-day life in South Africa. So local, of course, municipalities have also been reported as significantly impacted by corruption, with Corruption Watch describing them as amongst the most corrupt institutions in the country. So by 2022, we see that a global initiative against transitional organized crime has described the presence of organized crime as existential threat to South Africa's democratic institutions, economy, and people. So, the most, of course, sectors in South Africa that are most reported about corruption, police takes lead in number one, COVID-19 related corruption between the COVID-19 period, housing, traffic, licensing, and, of course, mining. So the state capture, we see that a type of systematic political corruption in which private interests significantly influence the state's decision-making processes to their own advantage became prevalent in South Africa during the president of Jacob Zuma. So the most notable instance of the state capture is the Gupta family scandal. State capture in South Africa has been estimated by the government to have cost the country up to our runs of 250 billion, to, which is of course estimated to be 17 billion US dollar between 2014 and 17, and to reduce the country's GDP growth rate by an estimated 4% a year. For former South African Treasury official of course Ismail has stated that the state capture during the Zuma administration caused such severe damage to South African economy that is effectively reversed all the efforts of the Mandela and Mbeki administration to develop the country's economy. So, black economic empowerment is that the notable types of corruption related to the government policies of the BEE, the Black Economic Empowerment and Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment, are the BEE flaunting and the political corruption. So, political corruption of course, requires have been requirements have been used to facilitate the state capture in South Africa, with the government contracts of course improperly awarded at inflated prices to politically connect tenderpreneurs, sometimes to the demeritment of the quality and service delivery. A notable criticism of the BBBEE is, of course, that of the policy that has been co-opted and, of course, repurposed by factions and powerful members of South Africa's political elites. So, mostly within the governing African National Congress for the purposes of corrupt self-enrichment at the expense of South Africans who are not, of course, politically connected, thereby fueling the growth of corruption within South Africa, reducing economic growth and increasing unemployment of the youth. So Mbeki has argued that the BEE is the biggest, of course, driver of corruption in South Africa. BEE fronting, we see that it is an abuse of the rules governing BEE, where qualifying persons are given a seat on the board of a company while having no decision-making power in a company in order to qualify the company for the government contracts in terms of the BEE. We see that in June 2017, Nectar, a company which operates the largest private hospital network in South Africa, was accused of BEE fronting. Since then, we see that 17 other complaints have been filed against the various South African companies regarding BEE fronting. Related to this cadre deployment and employment, which is an official ANC policy to colonize government with official loyal to the ANC. So petty corruption is of course a prevalent issue in South Africa's public service sphere. A survey conducted, of course, says that crime tested the extent and the nature of petty corruption in South Africa. One of the main issues highlighted was the survey in South Africa's lack access to information regarding how reports corrupt acts. So the fear of facing, of course, repercussions for the whistle blowing and the passive belief that reporting corruption will not cause change are two other concerns revealed by the survey in 2011. So respondents of the survey were mostly likely to pay bribes to, of course, traffic officials, uh, um, followed by police officers and officials in employment or post offices. So these findings support the notion that the perception of corruption in local government departments such as the traffic and municipal policy is high. So frequency of bribes involving police officers is concerning due to their role in tackling corruption and illicit behavior. So 5% of the South African, of course, experiencing forms of petty corruption involving either money, favors, and gifts, even though the percentage of experienced corruption is low. The high perception of corruption has led to respondents to prioritize corruption as the second most prevalent crime in South Africa. So Jacob Zuma's time is of course talked about as the time of corruption in South Africa, but we see that Jacob Zuma's time in office was of course marked by controversial and accusations of corruption. His resignation, of course, in 2018 came after months of pressure from the ANC. In 2018, it was announced that Zuma would be prosecuted on 12 counts of fraud, one of course, racketeering, two of the corruption, and one of money laundering. Zuma faced corruption charges involving the two the 2.5 billion US dollars South African arms deal on of course 2019, and the South African High Court denied Zuma a motion to withdraw the recent criminal charges against him. So Zuma was imprisoned for refusing to give evidence to, of course, the Zondo Commission resulting in July 2021 arrest. So we see that the Nkanda Homestead scandal involved the controversial and possibly corrupt funding of President Jacob Zuma's personal homestead at the public of expense after a home invasion and subsequent rape of one of the Zuma's four wives. Zuma accessed the means of appropriate security measures at his homestead. So we see that public, of course, prosecutor, protector in 2014 found that Zuma had inappropriately allocated state funds to finance additional home. South African highest court found, in, of course, improvements in addition of swimming pool, uh, um, amphitheater, visitor center, and cattle enclosure to his property. So in 2018, South Africa's highest court found Mr. Zuma guilty of violating the constitution in regard to the rubbish spending of 246 million rands, equaling to 19, of course, billion US dollars of the state funds on homestead of Nkanda. So when we talk about the Gupta family scandal, which I've been talking about, Zuma um, Suma's close relationship with the Gupta family has been highlighted in the former South African Public Protector report on state capture. We see that the Public Protector investigated that Gupta family scandal affected receiving former complaint from the Catholic priest called Father Stanislas Mayembe. The state of capture report released by the Public Protector, we see that South Africa, the 350, we see that the document we see that Zuma's preferential treatment of the Gupta family and the involvement of the Jacob Zuma's son and the Gupta family. The allegations reported include the Gupta family involved in appointments and removals of members of South African candidates. So the annual full awarding of companies and Zuma's conflict of the interest concerning his position and business dealings, the Gupta brothers, who have been major players in South African business for over a decade, began growing their relationship with the former President Jacob Zuma in 2013. And when he occupied the office of Deputy President since 2003, both the parties benefited from understanding wherein the Gupta family financed Zuma's family, where, of course, President Zuma appointed friendly officials and awarded lucrative state contracts to the Gupta empire. So South African authorities are seeking to recover up to, of course, 4 billion US dollars lost to these Gupta deals. So Jacob Zuma's son, African authorities are seeking, of course, Jacob Zuma's son, and of course, Gloria Ngume Zuma, a daughter, one of the Mr. Zuma's wife, received a large transfers and monthly salaries for position held in one of the Gupta families. So, Gupta family has engaged in numerous suspicions transactions involving a series of shell companies and of course state-owned enterprises. The OCCRP, we see that has reported that the transit contract with South African China Rail and subcontracts with Gupta-run organizations, state-controlled companies like of course the ESCOM transact are the center of illicit deals with Gupta companies. So an arrest warrant for Ajay Gupta was issued in 2018. Some of the members of Gupta family, those accused of corruption case, who are reported as residing in the Emirate of Dubai in June 2021. So the Bank of Baroda played an important role in facilitating illegal financial transactions for Guptas. When we look at the Russian nuclear deal, a Zuma administration and Russian government put pressure on South African government to oppose sign uh, 1 trillion rand, that is also estimated to 66 billion nuclear energy deal with Russian state-owned enterprise, the Rostom, to build and operate up to 8 nuclear power plants in the effort to resolve South African energy crisis. So both the Russian government and Zuma's administration were criticized for forcing through the deal by attempting of course, the circumferent South Africa's, of course, procurement laws. So then South African Finance Minister Naranda Nene gave testimony to the Zondo Commission that he was fired for not approving the 100 billion US dollar version of the deal in 2015. So the deal was cancelled by the court in 2017. When we talk about the ESCOM, the state-owned national power utility, ESCOM, has experienced numerous corruption scandals since the start of South African energy crisis in 2008, and the increased intensity from 2019 onward. So these range from outright theft of diesel for backed generators, providing substandard coal for coal-fired powers, and negatively impacted the construction and operation of the new power plants, notably the Madubi and Kisuri. So the ESCOM CEO, Andre, uh, uh, controversially stated at a public interview that the four criminal syndicates had established themselves in the ESCOM. So that corruption was, of course, costing the utility billion rand a month. This is a lot of money. And that senior ANC MP was involved. So when we talk about the arms deal scandal, there are a lot of instances that have happened in South Africa related to Zuma's regime, and how, of course, um, corruption happened in South Africa during that time. When we talk about the arms deal scandal, the arms deal, formerly known as the strategic defense package, was a multi-billion-dollar deal involving arms acquisition from countries such as Germany and France. So this arms deal set, of course, a precedent for cases of large-scale corruption and high levels of bribery and embezzlement in African National Congress. So this arms deal came at the time when the AIDS epidemic was rampant throughout Africa, and poverty and inequality in the region is still, of course, and of course it remained among the highest in the world. So taxpayers protested the arms deals through the public interest lawsuit, claiming that the deal was unconstitutional and irrational. So various South Africans and international evidence terms have been investigating the arms deal since the early 2000s. So rumors of embezzlement and bribes and, of course, kickbacks between the external players in the procurement and the ANC have prompted further investigations. We see that the former President Zuma appointed commission of inquiry headed by Judge Willie Stifu to investigate allegations of impropriety, fraud, and corruption around the 1998 arms deal. So, as of March 2018, Jacob Zuma has been facing 16 charges of corruption, money laundering, racketeering, fraud involving the 1988 arms deal. In total, Zuma has been accused of accepting 783 illegal payments, including receiving bribes from the French arms firm via his financial advisor. So in April 2018, 2 months after resigning from office, Zuma was charged immediately with the graft by the national jury. So a South African High Court upheld all the charges against Zuma. So a 15-month prison sentence was issued to Zuma for contempt to court on this case would be reserved by the Constitutional Court of South Africa. So we see that it was agreed that the South African President Juma, the former president Zuma, criminal trial for his ward of course, for this ward case would begin earlier 2021, and they did so. Prior to his imprisonment, Zuma threatened that his arrest would result in nationwide riots. Following his imprisonment in 2021, triggered large-scale riots and looting in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces. So there are even other notable, of course, corruption scandals like the Reverend Alan Bost that was found as misappropriated donor funds in 1944 intended to his foundation to peace and justice, causing significant public controversy. So South Africa has experienced a lot of corruption. Like when we talk about inflation, someone's mind goes to Zimbabwe. So when we talk about corruption in South Africa, our minds go directly to South Africa. There is also the 1995 senior ANC member Winnie Mandela was accused of receiving over 20 US dollars, 20,000 US dollar bribe from building contracting companies so they could secure government tenders to build public housing. So Safrina, the second was the government funded play based on, of course, the musical Safrina that was, of course, increased awareness of the South African HIV epidemic. So the ANC in 1996 and South African government were criticized for not taking action against the health minister uh, Osana Zuma and other ANC members accusing them of corruption and misconduct in organizing the 4 million pay. So ANC deputy members, so a lot of scandals, of course, that are related uh, to corruption in South Africa have been put out, but we still see high cases of corruption within South Africa.
Oh, Okay, okay. Um, I was still on the conflict part and the economical part, but most of the conflict parts in Africa, we know that across parts of Africa, internally displaced people or refugees and migrants have been driven from home by armed conflicts, repression, communal violence, poverty, and environmental factors. And we know that these conflicts have been caused by, of course, different uh, different things. And like I was telling you previously, that most of them have a very huge impact, and they have been caused by different reasons. Anyway, in North Africa, indebtedness and conflicts are affecting the northern part. The World Bank's Middle East and North Africa economic update highlights that lackluster growth, rising indebtedness, and conflict in the Middle East are affecting the economies in the region. Now, this situation underscores the need for better civilian protection and accountability for abusers. You remember there is a time where we had a lot of issues within Libya. If you all remember, a lot of people from the western part of Africa were captured in Libya. Yeah, they were trying to cross, I guess, through the Mediterranean to go to Europe. Most of them lost their lives. Most of them were arrested and put in small, tiny cells. And we saw, of course, different governments trying to work hand in hand to make sure that they set the people free. We know the situation in Libya, of course, since the death of Muammar Gaddafi, that there has been a lot of insecurities all over the place. And these insecurities are caused by different beliefs, of course, and of course, unsatisfaction when it comes to leadership. The story of Libya is still a long one, but to cut it short, they're experiencing an economic setback. And of course, I guess people are trying to struggle to make sure that they find ends meet because these are people who were used to apparently getting everything they wanted at that time, and which of course is not the case as of recent. We know that extreme drought and hunger crisis as a devastating drought causes of El Nino have left millions hungry in South Africa. Aid groups face budget cuts and crisis. Urgent action necessary address this is a humanitarian catastrophe all over at the southern part of Africa. There is a certain time where we usually see a lot of South African people having containers of water. They usually picture that all over the media, and the place seeming to be so dry, with the earth cracked, with no trees, with people having buckets and empty bottles, containers, and they are lining up to get water. It actually seems so disastrous, but yes, it does. We know that Sudan marks the grim anniversary of its civil war, which began exactly 1 year ago. The warning parties, um, the warning parties continue to escalate tensions, impacting civilians. We have realized that there has been a war in Sudan for some time, even before Southern Sudan broke away from Sudan itself. These people have always been at conflicts. Forgetting the conflicts of the two politicians of the military, one the military and the civilian armed forces, and also the two military officers colliding, and then the religious disputes, and then the ethnic and tribal wars. Sudan is engulfed with a lot of conflicts being caused by different things. And then we see the southern part of Sudan breaking away from this other major Sudan, and of course claiming gaining its independence as a southern part of Sudan and joining the East African Committee or the East African region. Um, until now, even after gaining all that, Sudan and Southern Sudan really experienced a huge war until now. Putting aside the cattle issue and of course and thefty robbery and all that falls along the conflict, there is still those are the small minor groups that cause conflicts for their own personal gains, but we have realized there has been a lot of ammunitions distributed all over Sudan that anyone can have access to guns. That was so visible in the southern part of Sudan where the Dinkas usually live with guns. Normally guns were like a usual weapon and the government had nothing to do about it. And at that time, whenever they used to have the Dinka or the Sudanese refugees coming to Uganda, it became a tug of war for Uganda to, of course, fight the refugees that used to come with guns down here in Uganda at that time. We know that in the last 15 armed conflicts, in at least 15 armed conflicts across sub-Saharan Africa, both government, both government forces and non-state armed groups have been implicated in abuses against civilians. Countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Mali, Burkina Faso, and South Sudan face significant challenges of the armed conflict that's around Africa. We should not forget, of course, Nigeria facing challenges in Boko Haram, which, of course, is expanded to a level of terrorism. Um, of course, we know the Boko Haram is a Muslim group that is up against the Western education system, and it does not, of course, it does not agree with the education system of the Western people or the British or the colonizers' education system. So they decided to go to war, and I disagree. Being a Muslim, jihad, and also being jihadist, they put forward the religious of Islam to be the top. That should be, of course, leading the country of Nigeria. Yet there are a lot of religions in Nigeria and different tribes, so there's still a lot of struggle in Nigeria and the Boko Haram. The Boko Haram still extends to Niger, Cameroon, and other countries. It is not only in Nigeria but also in the neighboring countries of the neighboring countries that are surrounding Nigeria. Now we know that some progress has been made in ensuring justice for serious crimes, with the trials beginning in the with the trials beginning in the Central African Republic and Guinea. We know that the International Criminal Court is also addressing crimes implicating military leaders in the Central African Republic and then Sudan. When it comes to the International Criminal Court, it's for me it's a laughable issue because I feel like the International Criminal Court being so hypocritical when it comes to matters that are concerning Africa. They rather not address the real hypocrites here, and of course face probably the machineries, or probably maybe face those who are being used. I would really support if at all crimes are there to put discipline. Uh, Courts or criminal courts are there to put discipline within the society. That means if at all you are to, of course, condemn, you should uproot, not to cut. The International Criminal Court only slashes and leaves the root system of the entire problem. And I feel like it is just so hypocritical, and I'm never in support of the International Criminal Court anyway. Secondly, Africa have the right to make their own law and also decide how to decide on what they find fit and what to do about the different crimes. It is a different thing for Mzungu to wake up one time and decide. And this we know very well these are the people who are using these leaders to commit this very crime are looking arresting people for. All right, we know that the conflict in the northern Ethiopia's Tigray, Amhara, and Afar regions have severely impacted civilian populations and leaving many displaced and without access to humanitarian assistance. We have seen this conflict all over different, of course, countries. Um, and like we say, that there is that conflict that is still going on until now, and we're still a little bit into questions what and how are we going to avoid this kind of conflicts, in Africa. But of course, the conflicts in Africa are fueled by, are fueled by different people for different reasons. I feel like it is more to what meets the eyes. But anyway, violent clashes have escalated between Democratic Republic of Congo Army and Rwanda-backed M23 Tutsi-led rebels in the eastern Congo, killing scores and displacing hundreds of thousands. The fighting in a war that has lasted decades has increased the risk of oil out conflicts between Congo and Rwanda that could suck in neighbors and regional forces, including South Africa, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and Malawi. We know that we have Sudan, Congo is one of the countries that can never be forgotten. If at all we are to mention, of course, this one. Now, in the capital, Kinshasa, in the northern Kivu province, uh, provincial capital, Goma, Congolese have taken to the streets to protest against deteriorating security in the east and have accused the international community of not doing enough to hold Rwanda to account for its support for the rebels. Now, probably most of you would be questioning, like, why are the people in Congo again pinpointing to, of course, Rwanda? Now, we should remember that 2023 is the reason why Congo is pointing its fingers to Rwanda now. The M23, which refers to the March 23 date of a 2009 accord that ended a previous Tutsi-led revolt in eastern Congo, is the latest in a series of groups of ethnic Tutsi-led insurgents to raise up against the Congolese forces. The Tutsi we know that the group has accused the government of Congo of not living up to the peace deal to fulfill integrity Congolese Tutsi into the army and administration. It also vows to defend Tutsi interests, particularly against the ethnic Hutu militants like the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda (FDLR), founded by Hutus who fled Rwanda after participating in the 1994 genocide of more than 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus. Now, if you look at the situation, like I was explaining to you guys, some of these conflicts we have are traced way back in the civil wars that and the genocides and different things that were happened centuries back. Now we have the Hutus and of course the Tutsis in the Rwanda as a country. And if I told most of you have, of course, got to learn about the Hutu Tutsi or the genocide of 1994 that took place in Rwanda. Now these are some of the people. We are seeing that the Tutsis, of course, they made a deal with the government of Congo, and of course, having agreed to be part of Congo as a country, the Congo welcomed the Tutsis. Remember, we have got some Tutsis in Congo, all right? We have got some Tutsis in Congo, and we have got some Hutus in Congo. So when we had that conflict, a lot of Tutsis moved into Congo. But remember, the reason why the Tutsis are fighting, are rebelling against the government, they feel like Congo government has not fulfilled its the part of the bargain. Like they're supposed to at least be in the military forces. Military forces do not register the Tutsis, and they're not seeing the Tutsis in the parliament and in the government sector. So, which I think has hurt the Tutsis in Congo, and hence causing, of course, this conflict. And then, will not forget the Tutsis trying to defend their interests, particularly against the ethnic Hutu militants like the Democratic Forces of the Liberation of Congo. Now, the Democratic Forces of the Liberation of Congo, the Liberation of Rwanda, sorry, the FDLR. I still keep asking myself why this particular force is still in Congo. It does not make sense because Congo is not Rwanda. You cannot be fighting for the democracy of Rwanda when you are in somebody else's land. So the Tutsis, of course, who are the M23, are fighting against these particular Hutus, and they are saying that the Hutus came in Rwanda, of course, to hunt them down. And this has been so audible with, of course, Kagame. Kagame said he sends the Rwanda Democratic Forces to, of course, hunt out the Tutsis at that time. Now, the rebels have become close in Goma in the past few weeks and are now stationed in the hills outside Sake, 25 kilometers from Goma, having blocked off the main roads to the north and west of the city. Capturing Goma would be their biggest military gain in more than a decade. Now we know that in 2012 and 2013, the M23 seized the large parts of eastern Congo and entered Goma, a strategic economic hub, before they were chased out by Congolese and the United Nations forces into Uganda and, of course, Rwanda. So that means the M23 rebels were just, there was a certain time where they had one on fire with the Congolese army and the United Nations forces. And these people ran right to Uganda and, of course, into Rwanda. We see a lot of Congolese. I said it. Most of these refugees we are having here are just a lot to do with the rebels and all that that comes along. Whatever. Now, in March 2022, the group launched a series of attacks and seized large areas in the eastern Congo, saying the move was defensive response to attacks by the FDLR. Now, this is the forces, like I said, that is, of course, supported by the president of Rwanda, which is said was collaborating with the Congolese army. The Congolese army has denied working with the FDLR. Now, remember, there was even a time these people were trying to point to Kagame and trying to ask Kagame to withdraw from Congo and all that. And of course, the M23 still feels like um, the M23 feel like the government of Congo has a lot to do with, of course, the situation that is going on in Congo at that time. With the situation has a lot to do with the relationship of Rwanda, Congo against the M23. So the government of Congo, United Nations officials, and the Western powers, including the United States and Belgium, have accused Rwanda of providing support for M23, including arms and soldiers, despite Rwanda's repeated denial. I think this was so loud, apparently. The news was all over that, of course, people got to uh, hear about this now. Rwanda and Uganda have a long history of military intervention inside Congo. The two countries invaded in 1996 and 1998, claiming they were defending themselves against local military groups. Now, the USA has urged Rwanda to withdraw its military personnel from Congo and remove service to air missile systems. And of course, Rwanda has so very much been involved with the situation of Congo. And actually, the debate of Rwanda and Congo's involvement will be of next time when we shall explore, Rwanda and how Rwanda is building and developing rapidly on the expense or on the bloodshed of the people of Congo. That will be yet of another topic. Now, Rwanda has blamed the escalation of Congo's decision to end the mandate of regional peacekeepers. It added that its actions were taken due to threats of Rwanda's national security, including statements by Congolese officials threatening to invade Rwanda. So Kagame Kagame appears to be invaded all the time. Now, fighting has continued despite numerous ceasefires brought by regional leaders and the United States in 2022 and 23, frustrated by the ineffectiveness of regional troops, particularly from Kenya, deployed to enforce the withdrawal of the rebels. Congo decided to end the mandate of the regional force, leading to it pulling out in December. Now, in May, the 16-member Southern African Development Committee, SADC, approved a military mission for the Eastern Congo to help the country address instability and tackle armed groups. Now, unlike the East African forces, the SADC troops, who include forces from South Africa, Malawi, and Tanzania, have an offensive mandate to support Congo's army fight rebel groups. South Africa has said it will contribute 2,900 troops. It reported that two of its soldiers were killed and three were wounded by a mortar bomb in eastern Congo. So we are seeing a lot of countries trying to at least come and help, of course, this situation in Congo. But of course, we have seen that the war in Congo has lasted in Congo for a very, very, very long time, and all these things have actually. The problem is whoever enters Congo and sees how rich Congo is doesn't want to withdraw. They usually change their mind and end up doing something else, I guess. So let's hope those who are promising to help Congo recover really do exactly what they are promising, rather than disappointing Congo. You know. Now we know that apart from Cameroon, we also have sorry, apart from Congo, we also have Cameroon, and we usually call it the Anglophone crisis. the Cameroonian Civil War. All right, Cameroon is affected by three complex crises: the Lake Chad Basin conflict, the Northwest and Southwest crisis, the Central African Republic refugee crisis. The Northwest and Southwest crisis has led to restrictions on humanitarian access and abuses against aid workers. They have also been attacked by Boko Haram and, of course, ISWA. There is also a crackdown of political opposition and decent, of course, issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity. There are also issues um, of injustices and accountability. There are also concerns about key international actors involved in, of course, this very situation. But let's briefly look at the Anglophone crisis. Oh, we know that the Anglophone crisis is happened um, started around 2017 and it's still ongoing. It deeply rooted in the colonial history of Cameroon, during which, like I say, in the brief, I was telling you guys that this had to do with the French-speaking people and, of course, English-speaking people in Cameroon. Oh my Lord. This Anglophone crisis, probably most of you know it as the Ambazonia War. Yeah, because if you are to check all over the social media platforms, you will realize there is an Ambazonia War. Okay, so um, let me give you a brief history about this. The Anglophone crisis, also known as the Ambazonia War or the Cameroonian Civil War, is an ongoing armed conflict between the Cameroon armed forces and the armed separatist groups. Now, this crisis is part of the long-standing Anglophone problem in Cameroon. And of course, the crisis began after the suppression of the 2016 to 17 protests. All right. And by the way, it started in a very funny way. You see how things start. We were all anyway. The crisis began after the separation of the 2016 to 2017 process by Cameroonian authorities. Following this, separatists in the Anglophone region, formerly known as the Southern Cameroon, launched a guerrilla campaign and later proclaimed independence. Within 2 months, the Cameroonian government declared war. Remember, these are two different regions. One side is colonized by the British, the other by the French. Okay. So within 2 months, the Cameroonian government declared war on the separatists and sent its army into the Anglophone regions. Now, starting as a low-scale insurgency, the conflict spread into most parts of the Anglophone regions within a year. Now, by the summer of 2019, the government controlled major cities and parts of the countryside, while the Ambazonia nationalists at that time held other parts of the countryside and occasionally appeared in major cities. Separatists had also carried out raids into neighboring francophone region. Now, thousands of people have been killed in the war, and more than half a million have been forced to flee their homes. The crisis has led to humanitarian catastrophe with a significant casualties and displacement. Talks, of course, mediated by Switzerland in 2018, ultimately failed. The Ambazonia leadership crisis has complicated any diplomatic process. And we see in July 2020, Cameroon began negotiating with imprisoned separatist leaders in response to mounting international pressure for a global ceasefire. The situation remains ongoing with significant humanitarian and political consequences. For more details, of course, we shall continue this particular topic. It is a little interesting one. We shall have a topic of this very Cameroon war that is still ongoing. It started as something, it started as a riot. People are looking at this and they thought maybe it's going to end tomorrow or it's going to end tomorrow next, but each and every day people were losing lives. The government of Cameroon, in of course trying to prevent what was going on at that time, it ended up hurting a lot. We are seeing videos of young pregnant mothers being killed, babies being murdered, uh, military forces of Cameroon joining this, and of course, joining in and killing people whom they thought maybe were keeping this, the people who were up against the government. So the war escalated. Whenever the government felt like they never trusted you, it killed. So a lot of people were up against these actions of killing civilians just because they felt like they were harboring the non-civilians who were up against the government, which sounded so barbaric and so inhuman. This is another genocide that is taking place in Cameroon right now as we speak, and like I said, it started in 2017 and is still going on. So where is Africa going? But anyway, thank you so much for those who love and support Black Coach Fire Network. This is where you find a lot of information, of course, a lot of information about Africa, and of course, the Black people at large. We usually broadcast a little bit earlier. Sorry that we came a little bit late today, but maybe tomorrow it will be a little bit different. But thank you so much for, of course, being part of our show. Thank you so much, Lando, for those comments, and thank you so much for, of course, our brother from Facebook, of course, Ofari Mensa. It has been long, but thank you so much. And I'll not forget the silent majorities from Twitter. Thank you so much for always watching us and supporting Blackwood Fire Network. It has been me, Africa Maria, with my colleague INNOSSETU, and then we are saying have a blessed night, day, or whatever, but it is night here. And then we shall say good night. See you tomorrow, guys, and stay blessed.